The fruit that we're looking at today is goodness, and obviously, I'll give you the spoiler right now. The goodness that Paul is talking about is obviously wrapped up and seen and fulfilled in Jesus Christ. Now, knowing that is one thing. The goodness of God and knowing it is one thing. And it's easy, right? That's the easy part. We know what the goodness of God is. Arriving there is a little more complicated. Arriving at that conclusion is going to take a little more work, and it's going to take some justification and looking at some things. And that's kind of what I wanted to do this morning as we go through and we continue to look at these fruits of the Spirit, which we know the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, and goodness is what we're on today. And as I said, we'll try to get through all of goodness today. If we can't, we can move over into next week. We have that wiggle room. But I think we can get through all of this today. So, goodness comes from the Greek word agathosune. Now, I started doing the enunciation stuff for myself because I've been butchering these Greek words. And it's sad because I took Greek, right? And I still butcher the Greek words. But you're supposed to emphasize the accent marks and different things like that. So agathosune is the way you say that. Now, agathosune can also be translated generosity, which is interesting. It's primarily ascribed to virtue and beneficence. So when we're talking about goodness, when we're talking about biblical goodness, we're talking about virtue and beneficence. And it's used to describe the uprightness of heart and life. And there are various verses where you can see that this is taking place in 1 Thessalonians 1:11, Romans 15:14, Ephesians 5:9. These are places where that word is used in its various contexts and primarily is describing in one form or another virtue and beneficence. Like, what are you getting from the goodness of God? What does the goodness of God bring? And what does it bring to the church? And that's pretty important. So 1 Thessalonians 1:11, Romans 5:14, and Ephesians 5:9. Now, goodness as it's used in the Bible is more than just being polite or acting kind. It's goodness as defined by God. His actions are described as good. His Son is described as good. Ultimate goodness is found in God. And yet, if we are to be good the way Paul talks about it, it can only happen through him. See, baked into the cake of your genes and your DNA is God. I mean, he created you after all, and whether you believe in him or not, his fingerprints are all over you. So human beings can naturally be good and do good things even if they're not necessarily Christians or following him. There are some people who have lived horrible lives who can do very good things. So we have inside of all of us the ability to do good things, but God says, I can cultivate you in a way that you do good the way that I do good, the way that I see people, the way that I interact. And that's what Paul's talking about. That's why this is one of the fruits of the Spirit. Goodness, the ability to be kind, to be good like God. And that's really what we're looking at. So the two things that I hope we're able to do is establish, A, that God is good, and then B, establish what exactly it is that makes God good. And that's the complicated part. We can know God's good. What makes him good? What is it that God can say he is good or his actions are good? And that's kind of what I want to dig into a little bit here. So Micah 6:6-8 is the text I want to look at this morning. And I don't know what PMN is in the middle of that. That's a typo clearly, but Micah 6:6-8 I think is a great verse to look at when we're examining the goodness of God. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with 10,000s of rivers of oil? Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God? So what is good? Well, you could say that the end is good. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. Again, that's what goodness is. But what is it about that makes God good? Now, I can't imagine there's any person in our culture, our society, in the world that would look around and say, people generally are good, or people are becoming good. Would anybody here you don't have to raise your hand, but would anybody here say that we think people are just getting better? People are becoming more good. People are becoming happier, better, kinder, treating each other better. We're becoming, goodness is just abounding out in the world. In some cases, you could probably say, yeah. But the majority of people that get asked that question say no. There have been lots of studies, lots of polls. I looked at some of them and I didn't write any of them down, but people generally, as of this year in this country, think things are getting bad. We're not good anymore. We're not kind anymore. We don't like one another anymore. And there are many ways to describe what's going on in society, but nobody really believes we are becoming more good, generally speaking. Now, that attitude in the church may be a little bit different, because I think in the church we look at people and we see what God sees, the potential in people, salvation, peace, joy, the things that we can things that can be brought to them through the gospel. So maybe that's a little different with us. But generally, when the world looks at the world says we're not good and we're not getting better. So what we can see actually is that there is a lot of darkness in the human heart. And the human heart is capable of terrible cruelty and evil. And we know this. You can just look at human history. And the greatest example that people often quote with something like this would be Adolf Hitler. I mean, I had a history class when I was at Fried Hardeman, and the teacher in the class said, "I'm not going to make you read Mein Kampf," which is Hitler's book called My Struggle. He said, "But if you really want to know what's going on in that man's heart, get that book and read in, I think it's book 2, chapter 9 or 10. It's just simply called The Jews." And this man pours out all the hate and anger and just complete blackness and void that's in his heart about these human beings. So I got a copy of it. I felt really weird going to the bookstore and asking for a copy of it. Like, yep, doing this for a history class. I'm definitely not a neo-Nazi. Nothing like that going on here. just wanna get a good grade. You feel like you need to announce that to people. But it's terrible and it's scary, because it's his dark vision of people that's in that book, ultimately. And so you can really see, and not much has changed. I mean, maybe we're not doing that on such a broad scale. It's still happening in our world, but if anything at all is tamping that social pressure down, is making something like that seem like that's not something we should talk about or something that we should do. As soon as you pull that away, it bubbles over. You remember Josiah, when they found the book of the law in the temple? And Josiah tore down all the idols. He tore down the Ashtaroths and the Baals. He said, we're establishing worship again. We're putting the law back in. And people complied, and they did it. The minute he died, everything went back up. Because as soon as you pull away the pressure to conform, as soon as you pull away the pressure to act and do things in a certain way, for people whose hearts don't want to be that, it just boils over. And so as we see God being pulled out of more and more, as we see morality and things that we've generally considered to be good being called evil and pulled away, we're seeing a lot of this stuff boil out more and more. And I think that's a lot of what's happening in our culture, and a lot of its power. In line with what we're talking about, look at the internet, for instance. So if you give people with the I'm my own protagonist, I make my own morality, I can do what I want and say what I want, you give someone total and complete anonymity to do and say whatever they want on the internet, and people say the most horrible things. When you're sitting behind a keyboard and you don't have to look a person in the face, you can say and do whatever you want. You can act however you want, right? And we as people say, what is wrong with these people? Well, they're just being people. But that filter that they have and all that pressure that they have to act a certain way, it's gone. I mean, you don't have to act a certain way when you're at home sitting in your pajamas with your cup of coffee on the internet telling people how horrible they are, right? And that's what people like to do. We love doing that kind of stuff. Another example comes from the old novel, The Lord of the Flies. Does anybody remember The Lord of the Flies? They've made movies out of it, several movies. I think it's 2 or 3 at least. But this is where a group of very civilized English schoolboys are shipwrecked on a desert island. And when the social pressures of civilization are off, these natural tendencies come out. They're vying for power, and the ability to be cruel bubbles to the surface. And that's exactly what we're talking about. C.S. Lewis put it like this. He said, what human beings need is not improvement. They need redemption. I mean, and he said that in Mere Christianity. And he's absolutely right. It's not that we can continue to improve ourselves. We can't do that in and of ourselves. We need Christ to improve ourselves. We need Christ to be better. And that's what he's getting at. So when the Bible speaks of goodness, it carries more weight than the English word for good, which is kind of that bland niceness. And so Micah starts off by asking a series of questions that people who consider their spiritual state before God at some point in their life are going to have to ask themselves and deal with. With what shall I come before the Lord and bow myself before God on high? Now, in Semitic terms, the way that they use this for the Jewish mind was that it implies position. It implies a relationship. Who am I in relation to who he is? And in that sense, Micah is essentially asking, how do I stand before an exalted God and have a relationship with him? Who am I to him to be able to do this? And what do I have to offer to merit this? So, again, it's a rhetorical question. Who am I to God to stand before him in a relationship? What can I give him? What can I offer him that he needs? Because in this day and age, you didn't really, if you wanted something or you needed something, you didn't just pull out your Visa card and get it. You didn't really even have money. I mean, they had shekels and things like that, but you didn't really have a means of cash. You had to barter. So I really need that. I need that wheat. Well, what can you give me? What do you have to offer me? Well, I can give you a chicken, and it's the same idea. What do I have that I can take before God that God says, I got to have that? So because I have to have that, I'm going to give you X, whether that's a relationship, whether that's freedom, whether that's salvation, whatever it is. And that's the rhetorical question Mike is asking. What is it that I have to barter with? What can I give God? And of course, we know that the answer is nothing. Practically every culture in human history, in the history of the world, believed that behind the curtain, that above the stars, that beyond what mortals can see, there was an all-powerful spiritual entity at work. Practically every culture, really up until the postmodern Western culture that we are all a part of today, people this really wasn't a point of argument or contention. Most cultures were polytheists. So what's a polytheist? Many gods. Yeah, absolutely. More than one god or many gods. Now, some cultures, the Jews, were supposed to be monotheists, which means one god. Now, at times, the Jews, though, were often henotheists. And a henotheist says, there is one true God or one main God, yes, but we also accept the other gods as well. And in most cases, we prefer them to our God. Now, did the Jews outright say that? No, but they lived it. They absolutely lived it. God was shoved into the back seat of Jewish culture, society, and life, and they worshipped every other god that they had conquered, every other god that had influenced them. And the crazy thing about it is that many people in the United States today who call themselves religious fall into the same category. Now, we may not worship idols of stone, metal, clay, rock, whatever it might be, but we worship the idol of money or power or self-image or whatever it might be. I mean, a lot of people who say, yeah, I believe in God, or yeah, I'm religious, have a lot of other gods that they have shoved to the forefront of their lives and pushed God to the back. And that's just a fact of reality. And so that's why Paul in Acts chapter 17, verses 16 through 17 and 22 through 24, says, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him, as he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious, for as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by men's hands. And so, the Greeks are like, hey, here's this idol right here that we're going to build, just in case we left one out. We don't want to make that God angry. And Paul's saying, I'm telling you, that God is the God. He's the one true God. In him we live and move and have our beings. He's not, in temples made with men's hands as though he needed anything. Paul is preaching the one true God to a polytheist society and culture. And the ancient cultures all believed in a transcendent supernatural power, but they also believed that we as human beings were small before that supernatural power, right? It was the eternal versus the mortal. It's them out there, big, on high, looking down, and me, so small and finite. What can I do? What can I say? Immense power versus limited power. The infinitesimalness, if that's a word, of God or the gods versus the finite me. The holy versus the unholy. So on and so forth. Now, all ancient cultures also had temples. Why? Why have a temple? Well, because this temple bridged the gap. Because nobody believed you could really talk directly to a divine being. The idea, and we talked about this last week, that you could have a relationship with God or a God, that's offensive to many cultures. You can't do that. But you need a bridge. You need a mediation in some way to be able to talk to a God or to be able to talk to God. And so the temple was supposed to be the bridge that mediated the gap between us and the God or God, little g, through priest sacrifices and rituals. Now the Jews literally had this with the law and the tabernacle and later the temple. Now today it's different, right? Christians are the temple. We are the tabernacle. We are the church today, and we can go directly to God, but we're still reverent, we're still fearful of him, and we're still in awe before him. And today, in our postmodern Western culture, we've become a society that has completely lost that sense of distance, that sense of awe, that sense of reverence, that sense of God is something to be revered and feared and loved and appreciated and acceptance. We've lost this between us and God. Why? Why have we lost this? Did you know that as secular as we have become, as worldly as we are to the degree that we are, that we constantly push God out of our schools and out of our institutions, a majority of people still believe in God as of 2022 in the United States of America. As far away as we've pushed God, people still believe in God, and a slim, I think it's something like 51% still believe at least in the God of the Bible. Now, do we practice that? Do we preach that? Do we live by that? No, not necessarily. But there's still a majority of people out there that if you put them in a situation where they're not going to be pressured by society or culture or work or be called bigots or fascists or evil or offensive or whatever, and you ask them, do you really believe that God exists? The answer is yes. We believe in God, according to these various polls and studies that have even been done over the years. But the idea that I owe him everything, and he owes me nothing, that I have to fall before him and serve him, it couldn't be any more further away from the identity of who people are. Because if you think about Jesus, when people say, oh man, you could be my friend, you could be my buddy, you could be this, you could be that. Jesus says, yeah, I can be all of that, but if I can't be your king, then I'm none of those things. I'm nothing. I either have to have all of you or I can't have any of you. And that's what people are missing. That's where people are falling short on this, because people love the Jesus who walks on water, who forgives sins, who performs miracles, but they don't love the Jesus who says, I am your king and I am your Lord. That's the part we don't like. That's the part we push away from, because again, as Adam said, we are our own protagonists. We make our own truth, and maybe he doesn't fit into that.
Proverbs says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. So you're not going too far unless you can throw in the fear element.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's 100% right. And that's what we've lost, is that fear element. Is he there? Yeah, maybe he's there. Do we care? No, not really. Right? And so that's what you've got. On the one hand, we've become extremely secular, as George just mentioned. Maybe God's there, but I don't need him. Or I can do just fine without him. Or, you know what? Maybe he's not even there at all. And that's one of the things that, going back to the early 1800s, was being pushed in our educational institutions all throughout Europe and the United States. Is he there or isn't he there? It doesn't really matter one way or the other, right? As we talked about, in Europe, that was the idea. God is dead. And so that has been pushed for a long, long time. On the other hand, look at everything God is and what he's created. If God created and sustains the universe every second, how can you just talk to God or even approach an entity like him? And of course, you know the answer. The answer is in Christ. Christ is the bridge. Christ is the thing that bridges that gap, that divide. Isaiah 59, 1 and 2 says that our sin has created a wall between us and God so that he will not answer our prayers and he cannot hear us. What breaks that wall down? What bridges that gap? What closes that chasm? Well, it's Christ, right? He reveals that we in and of ourselves are wholly insufficient, and he himself is the literal bridge that closes the gap between us and the Father. So the question that Micah asks then is, how can I, finite, flawed, limited, how do I come into a relationship with this good, exalted God? So he asks two rhetorical questions. Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old, or will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with tens of thousands of rivers of oil? Now, those are two pretty awesome questions because they really tap into the human heart even right now today. And you think, wait a minute, anyone here own calves? Have calves a year old? Maybe some of us might come from people, backgrounds where people farmed and people had, raised animals and things like that. But maybe I would probably gather that most of us don't have calves at home that we're getting ready to sell, at least not in Columbus. There are farms really close to Columbus. You can be in the city and then 5 minutes later be staring at a cow. It's kind of amazing. Columbus is really an amazing city with that. But how many of us have rivers of oil? We probably have bottles of olive oil sitting at home. We probably have different cooking oils that we might rub on ourselves that smell nice. I like to drop some of the orange oil. It prevents my cat from scratching up the carpet, that kind of stuff. None of us are swimming in oil, though. And here's what he's getting at. Of course, the answer is no. Does this stuff matter to him? No. Does it matter to God? No. It's rhetorical. And even in English, you can see that this is rhetorical. And the first thing he's saying is that all the wealth in the world would not suffice as a burnt offering. Now, what is a burnt offering? Well, a burnt offering was used for dedication and giving oneself to God, giving something to God. And so calves a year old were prime meat. They were weaned. They were expensive. Thousands of rams would be even more expensive. And 10,000 rivers of oil, we would consider that to be worth trillions and trillions of dollars today. And what he's asking is can I give you everything I have? Would that be enough, God, for me to give you every possession I have in my life, even the ones that are the most precious to me, and have you accept me? Would that be enough? Well, the answer is no. Of course the answer is no. If I could bring you all the wealth on the planet, would that be enough? Here's all my wealth, here's everything I am. Would this merit a relationship with this God on high? No. No, it wouldn't, because what do I have that God needs? Nothing. What can I give God that he can't live without? Nothing. The answer, of course, is no. There's nothing I can give God that he needs. God does not have a price. Now, if you are a product of the 1980s and 1990s, you might remember the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase. Now, the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, had a slogan or a catchphrase. And what would he say? Everybody's got a price. To me, he is the most ingenious character ever created in professional wrestling because he used money as a weapon, right? Most guys used a chair. Most guys used, a move. He used money. I mean, look at him. He had a belt made out of diamonds just for him. He wore a diamond-studded suit down to the ring. And what he would do, he would get in the ring, and right before the match would start, he would slip the referee $100. And then what he would do is if he was about to lose, the referee would suddenly get something in his eye. Oh, he couldn't see. And then his manager would jump in the ring and blast the other guy with a chair. Wholesome stuff. And and the $1 Million Man would win. Or if one time he wanted to be the world champion, so he just bought the belt, right? I mean, that's the kind of stuff he did. And his whole thing was, some of you might cost a little and some of you might cost a lot, but I'm the $1 Million Man and you will be bought. And he had this evil laugh. He is literally, if Mark 8:37 could be personified in a person, it would be him, right? What is it going to cost you to give everything to me? And that's him. That's what he did. But maybe everybody else has a price, but not God. God says, I don't have a price. You're not going to buy me. So then he asks his third question. And this is really what we're getting at here. This is everything that we're talking about up to this point. Shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, for the fruit of my body, for the sin of my soul? Does that remind you of somebody? Who do we know that did that? There are at least 2 examples in the Bible where somebody has done that. My firstborn son, shall I give my firstborn for my transgression, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul. Well, in the Old Testament, when you did something wrong, when you violated God's law, you brought a sin offering. Now, this is different than a burnt offering. A burnt offering was for dedication. A sin offering was for atonement. And when we wrong somebody or we hurt somebody today, what we often do is we go to them and we say, look, is there anything I can do? How do I make this right? We're trying to atone for that. And, if it's a minor thing, even at the human level, there's some things you can do. I can scrape your car in the parking lot, and I can atone for that, right? I didn't do that to any of you this morning. But if I did do it, I could atone for that, right? I could pay a price, and I could fix that. However, there are some things in life you can do to somebody that you can never atone for. There's a lady at the Mount Nebo Church of Christ on Route 2 in West Virginia. And when I was in school, I would go there on Wednesday nights, and she was in a wheelchair. And she said, one night I was driving home from work, and a drunk driver hit me, and I'll never walk again. So you can't fix something like that. You can't atone for something like that. There are some things you do that you just don't come back from. Sin is one of those things. I can't atone for sin. I can't fix my sin. Right? I can't do that. There's no possible way to fix the damage that has been done. Why not? Right? Mike is asking, but what if I gave you something? Well, that's not going to be good enough. What if I gave up my only son and suffered all of this pain and all this agony? Can that not even atone for my sins? And it can't. And why not? Well, because sin against an infinite God is an infinite debt. And there is nothing in my finite existence I can do to pay that, to fix the wrongs that I've done. Now, let me give you an example of this. Could I just surrender my life? No, I can't. There's nothing in my life I can do to make him accept me, right? Not all the wealth in the world can atone for sin. And here's the example I want to give you. If you remember the servant, the unforgiving servant, and I mentioned this a few weeks ago, the unforgiving servant is called in. He is a servant who has squandered the king's wealth, 10,000 talents of silver. And a lot of times in this parable, we kind of lose the impact, really, of how much in debt he is. Because people think 10,000 talents of silver, and we're like, oh, 10,000 bucks. That's not that bad today, right? Most of us could come up with $10,000 if we absolutely had to. We would borrow, we would beg for from family members. That's not what 10,000 talents of silver is. Do you know what a talent of silver is? A talent is a measurement of weight, roughly 75 pounds. Now, if you go down this rabbit hole with me, I'm going to show you exactly the point that Jesus is making and what Mike is saying about why we can't do this. 75 pounds times 10,000 is 750,000 pounds of silver is the worth that this man has squandered from his master. 750,000 pounds of silver. Now, as of yesterday, as of Friday, August 5th, 2022, the price of an ounce of silver on jmbullion.com was just shy of $26 an ounce. So, and that's up from a few years ago, and it was like $15 an ounce. You can tell, really the way the economy is actually going when you actually look at things like gold and silver. Now, at $26 an ounce, that means that a pound of silver is $416 if you were to buy it today. By today's standards, the total amount of money that the servant squandered from his master, if we're going to put it in today's monetary standards, is $312 million. Now, I'm just going to ask, who here has $312 million? I'm not going to assume anything about you financially. I just want to know if you got it, because we really need to be friends, right? I would imagine, and this is just a guess, I would imagine that all of us together, with everything we had, could not come up with $312 million. And that's the point, right? It's a debt you can't pay. Now let's go down the rabbit hole even further. The average lifespan in the United States is 79 years. That's up from 77 just a couple years ago. We dipped down and we dipped back up. The average salary in the United States today is $53,500 per year. If you worked all 79 years, which obviously you can't, you cannot be born as an infant and as a baby who is nursing and needs your diaper changed, step into a position anywhere where you're going to make $53,500 per year. And obviously we all retire for a reason, right? Because we get to a point where we're like, I don't want to do this anymore, or I can't do this anymore, or I worked really hard and I'm ready to not do this anymore. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, you could work all 79 years and you made $53,500 per year. before taxes, let's just not even take tax out, right? You would make $4,226,500 in your lifetime. Now here's the thing. It would take you 74 lifetimes to pay off a 10,000 talent debt. You're really getting the essence of the weight of this, of how significant this is. And of course, it's Jesus saying, you get one lifetime, and you are so completely incapable of atoning for your sin. Not even in 74 lifetimes could you do it. There is nothing, God says, you can do to have your sins forgiven. It has to be done for you. It has to be given as a gift. And that was the whole purpose of that parable. Now, all the wealth in the world can't atone for sin. Well, is there any kind of pain or punishment I can endure in this life for my sins and make him accept me? Anything I can do? And of course, no. All the pain and agony in the world can't atone for sin. What this means is that there's nothing I can do to merit or warrant a relationship with God, with the exalted God who has created all things. And so the average person out there who believes in God says something like, okay, well, if I'm trying my best and I'm living my life according to my own standards, and God sees that I'm trying my best, despite not being perfect, then God will answer my prayers. God will help me. God will bless me, right? Because he knows my heart and he knows I'm trying. It doesn't matter that I don't live for him. He knows, right? But Micah says, no, it doesn't work that way. You don't realize just how big God is and just how flawed you are. You have no idea the weight and debt of your sins. And you also have no idea the breadth of God's love to be able to say that debt is forgiven. It's gone. Follow me, love me, worship me, obey me. I'll wipe the whole thing away. That's the weight of sin. And yet, if I can never atone for sins, if I can never be good enough, God can. If there's no punishment I can endure, then God endured it for me. And the illustration that Micah uses is not for emphasis. It's not even just rhetorical. It's not even just an example. Micah is looking all the way back to Genesis, back to Abraham sacrificing Isaac, and he's looking forward at this point to another event that hasn't even happened yet. This is why prophecy is so powerful. He's looking all the way to the cross as he's pulling back from Genesis, and he's making a reference in and of himself. The firstborn represented the fidelity of the family. That's why this was a big deal. And it was the continuation of a legacy. And again, they didn't have much money. This wasn't about the money. This wasn't about the liquid assets. This was about the land. This was about the animals. This was about the servants. This was about the buildings. This was about you continuing on our legacy. And when God told Abraham to take his son Isaac and go offer him as a sacrifice, Abraham did, and he stretched out his hand. And of course, we know what happens. God says, "Don't lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear or love, as some translations have, God, seeing that you have not withheld your only son from me." It's a happy ending, right? Isaac is spared. A sacrifice is provided. Abraham gets his son back, and really, Isaac was kind of an idol in Abraham's life up to this point. Everything was about Isaac. It was all about Isaac. And why did God just not receive the payment of sin through Isaac? Why did God just not take Isaac as a sacrifice? Why didn't he do that? And here is what makes God good. This is what makes him good. This is the hook. I guess if we're going to put a bow on this. God the Father also walked up the same mountain, literally Mount Moriah, where Jerusalem was built. And he did it through his son, Jesus Christ, completely alone, and offered up his firstborn son, whom he loved. And nobody was there to say, stay your hand. Don't do it. Don't make this sacrifice. See, what makes God good is that when you see Jesus hung from a cross dying for us, you can say to him the same thing that he said to Abraham. Now I know that you love me, because you have not withheld your son, your only son, whom you love, from me. We can all say it. He didn't hold his own son back. He stopped Abraham from killing Isaac. He did not stop Jesus from getting in the way of his own judgment to save us from our sins. That's what makes God good. That's what Paul is talking about. And so God's goodness is atonement for a people who couldn't atone themselves. His goodness is mercy from the judgment that sin demands. His goodness is grace for people who God once called enemies. And to practice goodness, like Paul talks about, means that you let the gospel first radically change your heart, and then you let that motivate you to help people in your life who can't help themselves in whatever capacity that might be, whatever way it can be. that they can't do it themselves. I had a lady yesterday. It's so ironic that this happened. I was at the store. I never carry cash on me. I happen to have $20 on me yesterday. And this lady walks up to me with a cart full of baby formula. And she says, look, I just lost my job. She said, I got a baby at home. She said, I need help. Is there anything you can do? And thinking about the goodness of God and preparing for this, I was like, maybe she's telling the truth, maybe she's not, I don't know. But I did what I could to help her. Now, ironically enough, I also saw a lady, an older lady with her daughter. Her daughter was probably, I'd say, my parents' age. So this lady was well up in years, and the daughter was helping her shop, which I thought was really nice. The daughter was clearly stressed out. You know, this woman may have been difficult or problematic, but I'm behind them, and as they're walking out the door, you know, the automatic door is open, and the mother goes, Heather, wait, stop, and the daughter stops and goes, Mom, what's wrong? And she goes, you almost walked right past that penny, and she's like, are you serious? Like, I just died, lost it. I couldn't help it. I mean, and I don't know if the daughter knew I was laughing or not, but I was cackling. It was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. You just walked past that penny. The goodness of this woman to not just completely throw her arms up, you know, and isn't that God with us, right? All the times in life that we do that to him, and he sticks by us and loves us anyway, and he says, do that for other people. I like what William Tyndale, as we close out, has a set of commentaries, the Tyndale New Testament commentaries. They're pretty good, but he says this: God's goodness is the root of all goodness, and our goodness, if we have any, springs out of his goodness. And I think that's a good point. And that's all I have. Believe it or not, we made it.